Hey, how's it going? So as you know, for the next few days, we're doing our lecture on religion, or rather our topic on religion. And religion is a personal favorite of mine because actually as a cultural anthropologist, one of the main things that I specialize in, and one of the main things that I teach here at UNT, is the anthropology of religion. And it's something that has always fascinated me, coming from a religious background myself, but also having always been fascinated by different kinds of religions and how powerfully they impact people's behavior. And one of the points that we want to make with this lecture is that religion is part of culture, and religion is a huge influence on culture. And what I mean by religion as a part of culture is that much of the ways in which we express and experience our religiousness are in fact patterned and influenced by our culture, which does not mean that they are not spontaneous. It does not mean that they are not deeply spiritually meaningful, but it means that there's a very human dimension to how we learn to be spiritual, one could say. So for example, you might meditate or be involved in spiritual yoga practices. Most likely you were not born knowing these practices when you came out of the womb. Similarly, the practice of Christian or Muslim prayer, these are both things that you learn from your culture. If you're interested in that concept, a book I would highly recommend is Tanya Luhrmann's When God Talks Back, Understanding the American Evangelical Relationship with God. She does a really good job of showing how attendants of the Vineyard Christian Fellowship Church, which is an evangelical denomination, come to experience what they perceive to be God in a very real way, and do so both through personal efforts, but also by the techniques of attending to their own thoughts that they learn from their denomination, from reading books and listening to sermons, and in other words, from social interaction. So religion is very much a part of culture. Culture affects our religion. Of course, we may not be from the predominant religion within our culture, but nonetheless, culture does have an effect on our religiosity if we're religious. At the same time, religion has a huge influence on culture. In fact, I would say it is one of the larger forces as far as having an impact on culture, along with economy, kinship, and a few other things. So here's just a few kind of straightforward examples of what I'm talking about with religion influencing culture. I went to the hospital last night because a family member of mine was sick. And as we were checking that family member in, they asked us for our religious preference, so we explained which church we went to. Now, ostensibly, we were there to have somebody get checked out for a fever and potentially treated for that, so for a medical purpose. However, there was religious things going on there. Well, for one thing, we went to a hospital that was affiliated with a Protestant denomination, Texas Presbyterian here in Denton. The other thing that was interesting about it, though, is that they felt the need to ask us as we were being admitted what our religious preference is. Now, why would they do that? Why would that be relevant to a doctor? Well, it's not so much relevant to the doctor, right? But instead, most likely why they're asking that is because they want to know if a medical situation were to get serious, who would you want to be the minister that would come visit you, or the priest, or the religious specialist? And perhaps even there's some degree of, if this were to go to the point where you're in a critical condition, a potentially fatal situation, would you need a religious specialist there giving you last rites or something of that nature? And so even in something as straightforward as medical treatment, religion was coming in and playing a role. Another good example is a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism by Max Weber. This is an oldie but a goldie in social science. And Max Weber, in addition to having a fantastic beard, was also a very good social scientist, kind of one of the fathers of sociology and anthropology. And really big on this idea that ideas matter, that ideas transform social institutions. And one of his best books outlining that argument was The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Weber made note of the fact that in European countries, especially European countries where there were both Catholic and Protestant people right around 1900, he saw that Protestant people were overwhelmingly surpassing Catholic people in terms of success within capitalism, as defined by they were more frequently being promoted, they were more frequently being trained for, going to school for higher management positions rather than contenting themselves with sort of laborer positions. In general, they were doing the kinds of things that within industrialized capitalist Europe it means wealth. They were succeeding at capitalism, if we want to look at it that way. And of course, what's the explanation there? Why Protestants versus Catholics? And he explains that, it's not just because they're from different countries, because this pattern holds true even in countries like Germany where there's both Catholics and Protestants. And it's not just that historically different groups have adopted the two religions, because that just kind of raises the question of, well, why did all the wealthy people adopt Protestantism then? So you really have to kind of come to grips with, is there some type of idea or belief within Protestantism that's different from Catholicism that leads people to be better capitalists? And in this book, and it's a great book, Weber kind of lays out that basically certain Protestant ideas, and especially certain early Puritan ideas about saving, about not partaking in worldly pleasures, and therefore the end result of that is, saving your money, not throwing it away on parties or something, or lavish living, right? So this whole idea of renunciation of worldly pleasures led to saving money. And also there was this whole idea of your job as a calling from God, and therefore you're supposed to work very hard at it. And then also this idea of your money is a gift from God, and so you should be investing it to make more money. And then also this idea that some people are saved sort of by predestination from God, and that one of the ways to know that you're saved is if you're materially blessed through riches. And so people had this sort of subconscious desire to succeed in terms of wealth acquisition to show that they're saved. So there was all these different cultural things going on because of their Protestant beliefs, and especially not just Protestantism, but early Puritanism, which is its own thing within Protestantism. But it had some cultural ideas like renouncing wealth, which led to saving, believing that you needed to show if you were saved, which led to working really hard, believing that your job was a calling from God, and thus working really hard, and so forth. All of those practices together basically led people to save, invest their money in their business rather than spending it on pleasures, and work really hard. Now, if you work really hard and are always investing in your own business and saving up your money, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that over several generations that leads to extremely successful capitalist practice, and at least barring structural limitations, that leads to a lot of wealth acquisition. Interesting argument. Another good example of religion's huge effect on culture is, of course, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, which you may or may not be familiar with, called the Hajj, H-A-G-J in English. And this is undertaken by Muslim people. In fact, it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam that every adult Muslim, if they're able to, should do Hajj once in their life, should go do pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad, and is also considered to be the first place where the Prophet Muhammad received revelations pursuant to the Quran. Now, that pilgrimage involves 2 million people going to Mecca annually. 2 million. Which again shows you some of the transformative and profound impacts that that religion can have on people, to the effect that 2 million people from all over the world. People forget that there are a ton of Muslims here in the States, in Britain, in places like a ton in Indonesia, which is actually where the most Muslims live. So not just Muslims that live close to Mecca, but Muslims from all over the world, 2 million of them a year, coming and participating in this pilgrimage activity. Very fascinating stuff. The 4th example I wanted to share was Jain monks. You may or may not be familiar with the world religion known as Jainism. It's much more popular in India than it is in the US, so you might not be familiar with it. So Jainism is sometimes called one of the 3 daughters of Hinduism, along with Buddhism and Sikhism, but in any case it does have historical relationships to the other religions within India, and it certainly has this idea of karma and reincarnation and different things like that. But one of the things that Jainism believes that's very, very interesting is very strongly in the concept of ahimsa, and it's not just found in Jainism, but ahimsa is very prominently and importantly valued within Jainism. Here, let me spell that word for you, actually. Ahimsa. Oh, it showed up backwards, because that's what it does when you hold a piece of paper up to a camera. Anyways, you get the idea. So ahimsa means non-violence, and in fact, or non-harm to other beings. Not just non-harm to other human beings, but this is interpreted by devout Jains as non-harm to living beings, sentient beings, period. And so for very, very devout Jains, for Jain monks, Some of them will do things like sweep the ground before them with like a broom as they walk so that they're not accidentally stepping on insects, or strain the water that they're about to drink to make sure they're not accidentally swallowing microscopic organisms. So not only would they be vegan, which is already a step that most Americans find extremely difficult to take, self-included. I'm not a vegan. Not only are devout Jain monks vegan, but they even take it so far as to try to scrupulously avoid even accidentally hurting the smallest of creatures. Whereas most of us from our culture, you see a spider or a bug in your house, you squash it, right? So this shows how powerfully religion can override or influence even people's most basic biological urges. In the case of humanity, pretty natural biological urge to eat meat. Jainism, a specific religion, can really override that for people and even cause them to go to really great lengths to not harm animals at all. Very, very interesting. So again, religion is part of and has a huge influence on culture. Now, you might be interested in knowing how big religions are, how common they are. Well, one of the things to point out is religion is found in essentially every culture. It's essentially a cultural universal, which those are actually very rare. Things that are found in every culture, not as common as you might think. There's several, don't get me wrong, and your book lists some of them if I'm not mistaken, but not as common as you might think. But religion is essentially a cultural universal. Now, you might say, oh, well, there's a culture to my workplace and we don't have a religion. Well, obviously. Or for example, I did field work for a time with a group of protesters living in Arizona. Some of them didn't have religion, right? And it's not as if they had a unique protester religion or something. So religion, so you can't say that necessarily every subculture or literally every culture has religion, but any, shall we say, society that persists for hundreds of years with its own culture has at some point historically most likely had religion. You just find it all over the place, anthropologically speaking. So religion is an extremely common human behavior, which raises really interesting questions. Whether you're a believer in supernatural forces and beings, like your professor, or whether you're a total skeptic secularist, either way, the fact that religion is found in virtually every human culture raises interesting questions about human nature, and what is it about human nature that religion is so common and it is so widespread throughout cultures? Is it because it explains misfortune? Is it because it speaks to the afterlife? Well, not every religion even says anything about the afterlife. Is it because it relieves anxiety? Is it because it gives people sort of a sense of how the world is ordered? There's a lot of possible explanations here that people have thrown out, and I think it's a question that's worth asking. Okay, another question you might have is which religions are the biggest? So about 86% of humanity identifies with a religion, according to estimates by the Pew Center, which is one of our best sources of data on this subject. And you might be curious which religions are the biggest. So how about you take a second, you think what religions you think are biggest and how big you think they are, and then I will show you. Still thinking about it? Still writing it down? Takes me a second to write things down, so just give me a minute. I'm just writing this down. Okay, 16.3%. Okay, 15%. Okay. So do you have it written down? What did you guess? Obviously you're not going to be able to tell me because I'm not there teaching you. But here's what actually the top religions are in the world. It's estimated that 31.5% of the world population is Christian. That equals about 2.2 or over billion people are Christian. It means, in other words, that approximately 1 in 3 human beings is Christian. So whether you're Christian or not, having an understanding of Christianity is arguably pretty indispensable to understanding humanity, at least 1/3 of humanity. And we might say more broadly just that understanding religions as an anthropological and cultural force is pretty essential to understanding humanity. 23.2% of humanity is Islam, or sorry, is Muslim, and believes in the religion of Islam. And so that's about 1.5 billion people, and in fact it's growing faster than Christianity, so scholars estimate that it will overtake Christianity potentially at some point within the next 100 years. 16.3% unaffiliated, so people that don't list a religion. And of course there's, in contemporary times, very large movements of atheism and agnosticism, but this could also include people that are spiritual but not religious. And generally surveys tend to show, at least here in the United States, that there's a much higher percentage of people that do believe in supernatural concepts than actually adhere to a specific, well, let me rephrase that. That even though a lot of people belong to a specific religion, there's still a big chunk of people that don't, but still believe in supernatural/religious things. Okay, 15% of the world's population is Hindu, about 1 billion people, a little bit less. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. And then 7% Buddhist. Then you get 6% folk religion, so that would be indigenous religions. That's a little misleading because with a lot of these world religions, like Buddhism and Christianity, you get people locally that are practicing their indigenous religions in conjunction with that world religion. Example, Mayan Catholicism in Guatemala. In some villages in Guatemala, you'll have people that are praying at Mayan prayer sites, but doing it in a Catholic way, potentially with Catholic candles, potentially praying directly to God the Father. Or you'll have people lighting the candles in a Catholic cathedral, but the candles are the 4 sacred colors of the Maya tradition. So you have this like blending of Mayan indigenous religion and Roman Catholicism in certain parts of Central America. So to say that only 6% of the world practices indigenous or folk religions may be a little misleading. It could be higher than that, in my opinion. 0.8% other, and then 0.2% Jewish. That's kind of interesting. People tend to think Judaism is larger than it is. It is, of course, larger in the US than that, but although Judaism is quite small on the world scene, hugely influential culturally for a lot of different reasons. One of which is that for a long time in both Europe and the US, that was one of the main religions other than Christianity. Another reason, of course, being that Judaism is, in a sense, if you want to look at it this way, kind of on a historical outsider perspective, it would be the oldest of the Abrahamic religions. And by Abrahamic religions, I mean, among other things, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, but Judaism being the oldest. So a huge cultural influence because of that, and a lot of other reasons as well, of course. How about in the US? What's the US like? Well, I'll put it this way. Sitcoms do not represent reality. If sitcoms did represent reality, here's what a sitcom with a cast of 10 would be like. 7 of the people in a cast of 10 would be Christian. So to repeat that, 70% of the US identifies as Christian. Actually, about less than 10 years ago, it was actually 78%, according to the Pew Center. So it would appear that Christianity has shrunk quite a bit over the last decade. What's been taking its place? Well, there's been a big increase in the nothing in particular category. 16% of Americans identify on surveys as nothing in particular in the Pew surveys. And so that would include a big spectrum of people, including folks you might know or might be yourself that are spiritual but not religious, that label. Or, they have religious feelings but don't belong to a specific religion. So 70% Christian, 16% nothing in particular, 6% are other, including in roughly this order, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu. Then you have 4% agnostic and 3% atheist. So if sitcoms reflected reality, you would maybe have one character that was atheist, but most likely not. You would probably have 7 characters that were Christian, 1.5 or 2 characters that was spiritual but not religious, or was agnostic of some sort, and then you would have a kind of a remaining character that was, again, either atheist or one of those other smaller religions, like Jewish or Muslim, most likely. Also, it's interesting to note that the percentage of people who believe in supernatural things is more than the percentage of people who belong to one of the major religions. So a Gallup poll in 2014 found that 86% of Americans say they believe in God. So again, a significant percentage of the nothing in particular crowd does believe in a religious concept, whether or not they are overtly part of an organized religion. That's really all I wanted to talk about in this video, some kind of basic concepts. Sorry, I keep adjusting my hair. My hair's gotten really long, so it's gotten really crazy to try to make it behave. Anyways, that was mostly what I wanted to talk about with this lecture. I hope that was interesting to you. I hope it was thought-provoking just on how powerfully influential religion is. I sometimes tell my anthropology undergraduates that, you know, religion is profound in the sense that it answers a lot of it, or it attempts to answer a lot of very deep human questions about purpose in life, what made the world happen, is there an afterlife, stuff of that nature. Religion is also pervasive, found in nearly every culture, also pervasive in the sense that it seems to influence so many different aspects of our life. So I hope this lecture has given you some stuff to think about how critically important it is to have some knowledge of religion, whether or not you're particularly religious, when you're trying to understand what it is to be human. Thanks.